Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community, and the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and with me today, our special guest is Jill Bryant Ryniker.
Hey.
How are you, Jill?
Very good. I'm very excited.
Me too. I am super excited to get to talk to you. You are one of the highly requested Linux spotlights out there, so I appreciate you sitting down.
Oh, thank you so much, Rocco, for having me. And it's so exciting just to be able to talk to you alone, you know?
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, when you're in the Biddle format, you really don't get to have that one-on-one conversation, so this will be nice.
Yeah.
All right, so you are a regular member of the Biddle Europe group because of your prior commitments. You can't make the regular Biddle, but you're there faithfully every month for Biddle Europe. And I gotta say that just like everything else that you're a part of, you bring this positive attitude to it, and I love that.
Aw.
But before we get into everything that you're a part of, I think people want to know, who is Jill Bryant Ryniker?
Well, I am the wife to my incredible husband, Steven Ryniker. He is known as Steve Husband in our Linux Gamecast chat.
Yep.
Because I came in first, and then he decided, well, I guess it's time for me to be watching Linux Gamecast. So he got in chat and got involved, even though he's not into Linux. Although, of course, he has to use it on his computers because wife puts it on. And of course, I'm on this show, so I am a Linux lover, of course. And I'm a huge computer collector, both vintage and new, and all running Linux when possible. I've got a DEC Alpha, a dual processor DEC Alpha behind me, the size of a coffee table. And yes, it has casters. I've got several Sun Spark stations, workstations, an SGI machine, Mac Classic, iMac, and G4 Cube, and every generation of PCs, including 386s, 486s, Pentium 3s, Pentium 4s, Pentium Pros, AMD K6s, K6s,
Wow.
5s, and Athlons. And I have actually also in my high-end 4-processor Xeon rendering workstations and blade servers for my animation render farm.
Wow. Holy mackerel.
And that's only the start of it. I have over 100 actually in the garage, and that's where like my C64s, my Atari STs, my Amiga 500.
Well, I was going to say, where do you fit it all?
Yeah. This room, yeah, believe it or not, you can't, because you're looking what's behind me. I also have like 50 computers behind these monitors. So.
Oh my.
Yeah, Ben calls me a computer hoarder, but I prefer to call it I'm a collector.
Yeah, a collector, I would say.
I actually have something cool I can share from my collection.
Do it.
I thought. Okay. This is a Micropolis full height SCSI hard drive.
Wow.
I've got 4 of these in my DEC Alpha behind me. And
holy mackerel.
These are incredible. My DEC Alpha came from the aerospace industry, and it was TRW, actually. And these drives came from there also. It weighs about 20 pounds. And These were the ones that Digital Equipment Corporation loved to use. But what's special about this hard drive is that it's redundant. It's got 4 platters in it. And if 2 die, the other 2, there's a mirrored image on the other 2. And, that's just amazing. It basically has its own RAID array inside.
Yeah. Holy mackerel.
And it still works. All my full hard drives still work and fire up. I've got, actually, this one has Debian on it.
Oh my gosh. You have more of them, you said.
Yes. I have 4. This is one of 4 in my DEC Alpha, and then I have several others in my Xeon workstations. I also have some full-height Seagate hard drives, as well as Seagate official audio-video drives that we used to use in the animation industry because they were the fastest drives you could get at the time.
Jeez. That is so awesome. I love it.
And then I also have a very unique mini computer collection as well, because I'm running out of space for my larger computers.
So you need to go minis just to put them in there.
Mini, and a little later I can show some of the ones that I have. But I've got POS stations and thin clients and lots of very unique mini computers. And that's actually kind of one of the things that sets my collection off from others, is that I have very unique mini computers. And in fact, some of them they have on their list for wanting at the computer museums in Silicon Valley. So I have some computers that they want.
Wow.
So eventually I might donate those someday.
Or you could just say they want them and just keep them.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's just, so that's one of my other loves.
That is an amazing collection.
And I'm also the co-host of LWW, or Linux Weekly Daily Wednesday. Yes, it's a play on words. So Jordan came up with that term. And it's my Linux news video podcast on the Linux Gamecast Network with Ben Stone and Pedro Mateus. Mm-hmm. And I'm also the Linux Gamecast community organizer, or as Ben, officially named me, the Morale Czar of Linux Gamecast. That's my official name. Go to the website.
That's perfect, though. That is a perfect name.
I just love that. And I'm also core organizer with Sharon Lake and Betty Chung with the LA chapter of Linux Chicks, so the Linux Chicks of Los Angeles. And I also love building computers. About a third of these computers in here I've built myself. And listening to Linux podcasts, playing games on Linux, of course. I'm on Linux Gamecast, and going to Linux conventions. And Scale is my first love of Linux conventions.
Well, I definitely want to get into the conventions and the conferences and get your take on it.
Yeah. Cool.
Jill, what do you do for your day job?
Okay, so I have been teaching computer animation and motion graphics at a local community college for almost 30 years. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And have worked as a freelance animator in the film, gaming, and television industries since the mid-1990s. And I've done work for ESPN, Disney, Fox, Warner Brothers, Electronic Arts, to name a few.
Really?
Yes. You've probably seen quite a bit of my work out there.
I'm sure. And you're still, you're teaching this community college. What exactly are you teaching them? Are you teaching them how to make graphics? Are you teaching them how to actually market them? What are you teaching them?
Actually, a little bit of both. Teaching the software that our animation students that come to me, they're advanced art students already. They already have their background, years of experience in, life drawing and traditional painting and bronze casting and all the arts. And so when they come to me, they're learning the software to create animation, as well as they're with me for 4 semesters. And then I also help them build up their portfolios to get into the animation industry or to get into the local art schools. And the college I work at is we have one of the largest art departments in the world for a college. We even have bronze casting. It's amazing.
Wow.
so I'm really proud to work there, and I love my students dearly, and I love getting them into Linux and open source because that's what's happening now in the future, and it's the future of the film industry. In fact, it's already there.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. How, like you're introducing them to Linux, are they receptive to that?
Oh, yes, because those that are serious want to learn what the real world is. And I want to teach them what the real world is. There's not just Windows and Mac software. In the Linux world, in the animation world, especially in the film industry, it's all done on Linux. You're using Maya, Blender, Modo. They're starting to use Krita now. It's just, I want to make sure that my students, understand the real world, whether they have interest in it or not, they need to learn it, but they're all excited because to them, they look at it as like, wow, you mean I can use this piece of software and not pay, $6,000 for it?
Yeah. Yes.
So they're excited. And one of my favorite things actually to do is I usually, we'll boot Ubuntu off a flash drive and download Blender and download Krita and say you can boot Linux from a flash drive and you can render on this flash drive.
All in the same flash drive.
On the same flash drive. And it's literal amazement because they're used to the Windows world of, reboots and slow startups. And it's, yeah.
Well, we talk about Linux being everywhere all the time, but people don't realize, like you had mentioned, that it's in the film industry.
Yeah.
And it's all over. And I don't think people really realize that that's what a lot of people are using to create these big films, not just small budget films anymore. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. The big one now that is taking over from Adobe is DaVinci Resolve and DaVinci Fusion. Mm-hmm. So that's taking the place of Adobe Premiere and After Effects. So,
yep.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Well, you just listed out all of the things that you are involved with. So I don't want to say, do you have any other hobbies? So
yes.
Do you have other hobbies?
That's my problem. I have too many interests. It's like I have so many that I've kind of had to stop other things I was involved with. My focus right now is Linux. But the other big one is I'm a huge Trekkie.
Really?
Yes. And I have a Star Trek collection as large as my computer one and have attended well over 100 Star Trek conventions since I was 10 years old and have worked with Creation Entertainment that runs the Star Trek conventions, setting up and breaking down, filming the shows for them and doing tech work. And the other cool thing is I got to work with one of the top people over at Creation Entertainment, Dr. Ben Rosenthal, as his number one at the very first Star Trek store in 1992-93. I was the manager.
You're kidding.
And that was a dream job. Man, that job was so awesome because I had spent, that was my second job, and I had spent literally 7 years at Mervyn's department stores in the children's department picking up baby diapers and clothes. So I went from that to my dream job. And when Ben found out I lived, literally within 2 miles of his house, he freaked out and he goes, "You are my number one employee." And that is, I immediately put in my, leaving my previous position and got to work at my first dream job. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. Now, there are so many, I think it's like synonymous with geeks and Linux that they're really heavily into Star Trek as well.
Yes.
I personally am not, but I've seen it, I've watched it. I'm not a Trekkie, but it just seems to go hand in hand. Even like the last person I interviewed was Michael Tennell, and he was, he's a big Trekkie fan. So it's like, it just goes hand in hand. Linux. And
And in
Trekkies.
fact, I have several tribbles over there. I've got probably about 40 of them now. And one of they're special actually. One of the tribbles, this is actually very special. For my wedding, as gifts for everyone who attended, we gave them tribbles. But they weren't just any tribbles. I got them from David Gerald himself.
Really?
He because I've been talking to him for years at the conventions and at different events. And he said I had bought the most tribbles from him ever in history. So yeah, and he's the one who wrote the episode Trouble with Tribbles. So that was really awesome. And then another tribble back there, I've got a pink one. The pink ones were from the animated series, of course. But I actually have an original tribble from the set that I got from Majel Roddenberry. Yeah. From when I was a little kid going to conventions. So I'm serious. I got stuff from the set. I've met all the actors literally hundreds of times. I have their autographs. I work for the company that runs the conventions.
Wow.
And that's my other love. And that was one of my first jobs, was helping set up and break down conventions. So, and that's what helped me get into the animation industry and launched my career. And I'm so grateful to Creation Entertainment for that.
It's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. I know somebody will ask me, do you have a count on the tuxes you have in the background?
Oh, yes. So the last count I did, it was like 95.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But I have more since then. I've collected a few more big ones. And these ones, I have more above the camera that you're not seeing in closets and whatnot. But those that started because of our Linux Chicks LA booth at scale.
Right. Well, let's talk about Linux Chicks.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with them, and what is that all about?
So the Linux Chicks is a worldwide organization that supports women in open source and Linux. And it's been around since the early 2000s. And unfortunately, the Linux Chicks LA is the only active chapter left. Today, in today's world of the internet and meetups, there's not as many lugs around. And
right.
We were the very first woman in Linux lug, essentially. So, and because of that makes us unique. We have meetups, but our meetups are hands-on workshops with everything from learning to install Linux on computers and Raspberry Pis to learning the command line. So we try and get new users into Linux. And we actually have just as many men in our group as women. And in fact, many of our members of our local community here in Los Angeles from Linux Gamecast, are part of our group. And the Linux Chicks LA are part of Linux Gamecast. And of course, so we jokingly call them our booth babes because they help us out at our booth at scale, the men.
So you not only have, you have a yearly meetup for the Linux Chicks.
Yeah, correct. And we do other events too, like conventions. We've actually, in the last few months, we've done so many events, including the Open Source Summit and Big Data Day LA. It just goes on because we have lots of events here in Los Angeles. And of course, our big event every year is our booth at the Southern California Linux Expo, where we share projects with the community. And this year, we had a Raspberry Pi photo booth, which was really cool. And the community really loved that. We had bought like Linux penguin masks and emoticons to wear and take photos of. And then we had a printer there printing out the little strips, just like a photo booth. And then several years before that, we raffled off 3 monitor gaming rigs that I built. And with that, we handed out tutorials on how to build one on a budget and configure games in Linux to run spanning 3 monitors. And that's one of my favorite tutorials I've ever written. Wow.
You should like do a YouTube tutorial.
Yeah.
On that. That would be awesome.
That's a good idea. I really should do that.
Yep.
I've been wanting to do that. So that's kind of will be my next step. And in fact, for Linux Gamecast, I have some ideas along those lines of doing videos, talking about how to install Linux on my computers and all that. So it's funny that you said that, because that's kind of my next step right now.
It's awesome. I love it. I can't wait.
And my very first scale was actually scale 5X. We just had scale 17X.
Oh my.
Yes. And the first place I went to was the Linux Chicks LA booth. I'd found out about the Linux Chicks and Scale from our beloved Linux Journal magazine. So I was just, so excited to meet them all. And it was such a warm and wonderful experience.
So, with these conferences that you've been at, I know that you love Scale. What are the differences between some of them? Like Scale is more, I guess, a corporate conference? No. Well, here's the thing. Scale is the largest community conference. Okay.
It is community. At its very heart, it is community. There's a lot of community booths, as well as, the Intels, the IBMs, the Red Hats. But one of the big differences is, even though we have all the big companies, they send their developers to Scale. So they're we're talking to people and getting along with each other, talking about their open source projects. So they're excited about the projects they're working at these big companies, let's say, like Red Hat. And so that's what makes a difference. It's these companies aren't sending their marketing people to Scale. They are sending their developers and the community. And a lot of the community lives in Los Angeles. So, and then we have people that come from around the world there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge conference, but
when it started, my very first Scale, there was literally only about 500 people. Now there's over 5,000.
It's amazing.
But it still has that community feel. It's what we call the biggest Linux love fest.
Yep.
Yeah. So you will love it, Rocco.
What is the difference between Scale and the Open Source Summit, or one of the other ones that are out there?
Yeah, Open Source Summit is more corporate, although they're trying to explore more, kind of expand more in community and doing smaller booths. But it is more corporate. It's where we have a lot of people who are headhunting at Scale as well, because they know where the cream of the crop Linux user is, and so lots of jobs are available. But at Open Source Summit, they take it to another level. So it's people that are, companies are headhunters, and they're looking to collaborate with the other big companies.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I think that that's one of my favorite things about Linux, and I've only been to one, but I still think it's my favorite thing about it is to get together with other people that are like-minded about Linux and talk to them. Yeah,
it's the hallway track. That's where you learn the most. It's definitely the hallway track in the expo hall.
All right, so let's roll back a little bit to the beginning of your computer career. Jill, where did you start in computers? What was your first computer?
Okay, so I had seen computers that filled rooms before because my grandparents worked for NASA. And but the first computer I got to touch was in the 70s in elementary school, and in the 3rd grade, when a huge computer with punch cards was wheeled into our class. And that was it was this big monster.
They wheeled it into your class.
It was wheeled into our class. And, I think it was a DEC computer, but I'm not remembering too well, but I'm pretty sure it was a Digital Equipment Corporation. It had green text on a black screen. And, most of the students were so intimidated by it and were scared to touch it. Because it was this big behemoth.
Yeah.
And I remember actually being excited about it and learning some of the basic commands in terminal, but also I actually remember crying because I couldn't draw on it, because I was an art student, and I was upset that I couldn't draw on the computer. And my teacher said that we aren't there yet, Jill, and that I was way ahead of the time of my time, because I wanted to draw on this computer. I was, I liked doing the code, but darn it, I wanted to make drawings.
Little did you know, years later.
Yes. So that was really neat when you asked that question, because I was thinking about it, and that's I remember
that is awesome.
And then our first family computer was an Apple II, and that was one of my favorite computers to program on in middle school. And in fact, I made my first animation program on it. It was about 14 pages of code in Apple Basic, making a black and white cube spin on the screen.
So you were like into like coding.
Yeah.
It's so early of an age.
Yeah. And, it was fortunate because I had access to it. And, my brother, in fact, one of the reasons is my brother started his IT and computer repair business in the 80s, when that wasn't a thing. Most people didn't even have computers at home. Right. So we also had an IBM, Atari, and Commodore 64 in the house. So, and then our schools were really good. We were one of the first school districts to get computer labs. So, because we were part of the aerospace community, and they funded our computer labs. So
what did you have computer-wise in the computer labs? What did they give you to use?
Everything, literally everything. C64s, IBM, Ataris, digital equipment. I had Unix. That's where I learned Unix. And we had done Fortran and Pascal. And I found out years later, this was amazing. My teacher in middle school, I found out when I, got older, that she was one of the original Unix developers.
Really?
Yeah. And she was one of the few women teaching, the computer classes. And so that was very, very special.
Yep. Well, I mean, you obviously, there's so many people that help out in this stuff along the way, and they do live somewhere and they do meet people, interact with people. And it's great when you get that opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? My brother, he always told me, he goes, Jill, it's not just because we had access to it. You wanted to do it. He was always impressed that, the 286 was the first computer I built. And, but I had taken apart our Apple II at home, much to my parents' chagrin. So when I can start building them, I got my brother gave me all the parts for the 286.
Were you able to get that Apple back together?
Yes, I did. So it was about $5,000 or whatever, a computer.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So you have this long history of computers. Take us through your progression of what computers you get then.
Yeah. So I had the Apple II, and then I was using the Atari for a while too, and the C64. But pretty much went from Apple straight to IBM. Straight to old IBM XTs and whatnot. And so my love for Linux started in 1993 when I downloaded many floppy disk images of Slackware Linux from my brother's Leet BBS. And I was his sysop, or sister operator, as he called me.
I love it.
And I remember being so excited to try this new operating system, and remember my brother Jack. Yes, it's Jack and Jill. Went up the hill.
There you go.
So my brother Jack telling me that Linux was a free version of Unix. And like I said earlier, I'd already played around with Unix in our computer labs in middle school and high school. And Linux had me intrigued because at the time I was a college student, and most animation studios were using very expensive Unix with proprietary animation software that was extremely expensive. Also, like Alias Wavefront, which later became Maya. And at home, I had been using Autodesk Animator and Autodesk 3D Studio Release 2 for DOS at the time, which was the first 2D and 3D animation software for the PC. And they were expensive enough, but at least they weren't, $30,000.
Right.
So, that's what I used through my college years to put out my animation demo reels for the studios and whatnot.
So you, like you said, it mentioned Slackware. That was the first distro that you ever tried?
Yeah. That was the first distro. Geez, Slackware, then Red Hat. Yeah, I actually made a list in my.
Well, those first early days of Slackware. What is the? Okay, so I'm surely not in that era of Linux. So what is that early days of Slackware experience, good and bad?
Okay. So I remember how long and tedious the install was. Not to mention just waiting for that many floppy disks to install. I think there were like 30.
Oh my.
and the highlight for me during that first install was actually having to turn around my 21-inch CRT monitor to write down the vertical and horizontal refresh rates from the label on the back of the computer, on the back of the monitor when creating my first XF86 config file, so that you don't blow up your monitor, because that was a thing that people.
Yes, that was a thing.
And I was always so very, 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 very patient, and made sure that I wasn't going to hurt any of my very expensive equipment.
Right. So, like, you were into all of this technical stuff. So you had no reservations about trying it on your computer or anything. You were just into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I always loved trying other operating systems. OS2. Yeah, was another one. And BSD.
Now, do you have a lot of experience with Macs as well?
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us about it.
Okay. So I'm also for years been a computer repair technician. So, and
you're like everywhere, Jill.
Yeah. That was always, a side job with all my other work I did after being a full-time student in college.
Do they have more daylight out in California or something? Because I don't know how you find time to do that.
Yes, we do. I'm amazed what I did in those years. And on top of it, playing like 4 hours of beach volleyball every day on top of doing all this stuff and working and going to school and having all these other jobs. I don't know how I did it. But so the Macs, I because they were at school and a lot of the teachers used them, I learned, Mac OS, Mac Classic, and then Mac OS 10 later. So that was, that was part of my job, is to help maintain the PCs and Macs at the school.
Right.
But at home, I dual booted Windows and Linux actually for many years.
Really?
Because Linux was still not mature enough yet to use as your main operating system. Mm-hmm. So, and as we were talking about earlier, I moved from Slackware to Red Hat to Debian and then to Corel Linux. Oh, it was one of my favorite distros. I love being able to use CorelDRAW on Linux. That was awesome. A well-known paint program was coming to Linux, and that was a big deal. In fact, I still have my CorelDRAW Penguin right there.
Oh my. That's one of the 94, I believe.
Yeah. Yes. But for me, once I found apt-get, Debian and its derivatives became my main distro for many years and still is today. Although I use everything, but that is my main distro on my main computers.
I was going to say, you say that's your main distro, but when you have 100 computers,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing, is I get to play with everything. So that's what's so fun. I have Endeavor OS on one of my laptops. I have Solus. I have Classic Arch. I still have all my original computers with the original distros. I installed my Slackware machine, my Knoppix machine, my CorelDRAW machine.
So it's safe to say that even though you have your main machine, you are a distro hopper. Yeah.
It's so funny because I was going to say I'm really not. I'm more of a distro reviewer and tester. I just put it on different computers.
Well, you have that luxury of doing it, but in order to qualify for a distro hopper, because you have the amount of computers you have, it qualifies you for that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yes. Very true, Rocco. Very true.
So you say that, you have Debian or Ubuntu on your main machines. What is it that you run on your main production machine? What is it you run?
Okay. So on the computer I'm on right now, I have Ubuntu 18.04.1 LTS, Pop OS, and
I love it. And you have a System 76 t-shirt on.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Pop OS is best OS. Sorry, that's a meme with me and Emma and Matthew of Lutris.
I'm with you. I'm running it right now myself. All right, so you have Pop OS on your main production machine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these other machines that you have that are there, are they something that you work on regularly, or are they just there that you have to just keep up to date?
Yeah, my vintage stuff and my old computers are just maintaining them and making sure everything works. Usually the first things that go in those machines are power supplies and whatnot. But so I'm constantly I fire them up and make sure they're all happy and working. But my work computers I only turn on when I have to render, because they are so loud. It's so loud in here that you can't stand being in the house. It just
really
it's that loud. Yeah, firing a pizza box blade servers. Oh my gosh, they have like 30 of those little tiny fans. Oh, they're horribly loud.
Super hot.
Yeah, super hot and super loud, and they're all Xeons. I have a couple of those pizza box blade servers, and then I have my main render machine that I use as my farm to go out to the other computers is a quad processor Xeon. And it was one of the computers given to me from one of the studios I had worked at. And I keep it up to date and whatnot, but that's running. I have Debian on there. I have CentOS. And on my Blade servers, just to have fun, I kind of put a different distro on all the different servers. So I have Debian on one, and I have OpenSUSE on another. So I've used Fedora. So I like to see how all the distros work together, and they just, because it's Linux, so it works beautifully. Sometimes there's little issues, but because all the software will work on all the distros, it's not an issue. So
you run Pop OS, which obviously means you run GNOME.
No.
Really? What did you do, Jill?
Okay. So I'm a bit old school, and when it comes to window managers, I do run GNOME. In fact, I will run it frequently during, when I'm doing LWW, and because I love Pop OS's implementation of GNOME. GNOME is the most beautiful, really, it is. But my main go-tos are Window Maker, Flexbox, Enlightenment, XFCE, IceWM, and TWM. Because I started in Linux so long ago, those are what I used. Because they're memory efficient, they're really good for doing animation because there's no graphical user, very little overhead, and fast. And I just, got more, just prefer the lower memory window managers. But I do still like to dabble in GNOME, KDE, Cinnamon, and Budgie, and all the others. I love them all. In fact, earlier we were talking about distro hopping. I'm actually a window manager hopper. So, because when I do my show LWW, it's every time I do the show, I'll go into a different user interface, a different window manager, and Ben is always amazed by that.
So that's what we call extreme distro hopping.
Yes, or extreme window hopping. Yeah, yes. And it's literally just what I feel like that day. Sometimes I feel like Window Maker, and sometimes, I just want TWM, really old school Unix, Well,
let's talk about your podcast, LWDW.
Okay.
What you're one of the co-hosts, one of the hosts of that show, and it's a podcast that's put out everywhere where you can find a podcast in a podcast app. It's also on YouTube. But this is like this show covers all of the news in Linux, but it covers it in such a cool way where it's fun and entertaining at the same time. So you're getting all of the news, but sometimes you don't realize you're getting the news because of the way you guys present it.
Oh, thank you so much. We work really hard to make, even though we have pretty extensive show notes, to just make it natural and fun and entertaining. And it's been a learning experience, that's for sure.
Well, you do this show with Ven Stone and Pedro Mateus.
Yes.
But the difference is you do this live, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And we interact with the community. We have a pre-show and an after show, and with the community in chat. And then, we have our half hour to 45 minutes of setup before the show, before we even go live. So yeah, it's most everything is done live. Ben does some editing later, but most of it is actually done live.
Yep. Well, I try to catch the live show when I can, but I'm not always home at the time because of working and whatnot. But I always catch the show, and I love it. So
Aww.
Every Wednesday, set your time for LWDW, and you will not regret it.
Aww.
So, well, by the time this releases, Jill, you'll have you guys will have released 190 episodes.
Yeah.
That is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So I can go into a little bit of my history with Linux Gamecast.
Do it.
Okay, well, I really started following Linux Gamecast weekly about episode 50. Today, episode 371 airs. So
wow.
I've been part of the community for a very long time. I had already made several donations and sent in a couple of emails to the show, but it was actually quite a while before I got involved in their IRC chat. And of course, having a girl's name generated a lot of attention because there was like one other girl that I had heard of, but she wasn't always there.
Right.
And, but it's so awesome is their community turned out to be so welcoming and not at all what I had experienced in other communities. They were just so welcome and so open for diversity. And I just love that. And what's amazing is the experience these people have and their depth of knowledge means that they can be extremely humble and understanding of other people. That is why there are no sacred cows or distros in our community. Everyone gets made fun of and supported equally, just like family.
Well, I think that, Jill, you mentioned that because of their extensive knowledge that allows them to be humble. But I think that's what makes it special, because there's not that doesn't qualify in every situation. So there's a lot of people that have extensive knowledge and may not be humble. That humbleness is a special quality. So
yeah, I have found the Linux community literally, are at kind of they're the extremely experienced Linux users, and they know they're still that, they don't know everything, and they're constantly learning, and they like learning from the community. And that's what's amazing about our community is the give and take, the back and forth, and learning new things.
Yep.
And that's just been amazing.
So when did you become part of the show? You were in the community. When did you become part of the show?
Okay. So Ven had actually asked me to be a host on Linux Gamecast several years prior to doing LWW, but I couldn't at that time. And wow, it's been a wild and amazing ride being on LWW. It has actually been 1 year and 6 months now. And the first episode I was on was LWDW 100 on January 10th, 2018. And I was filling in for Pedro and was joined by Jordan. So it was Ven, Jordan, and I. And after that show, this was amazing. Ven made me a Patreon goal to be a full-time co-host. Wow. That was such an honor. And almost made me cry a bit. It actually did. That was what an honor, and because our amazing community came together to make it happen. And it just, can't imagine what a welcoming feeling that gave me, that everyone wanted me as, the full-time co-host. And I was the first one in 6 years. It had been Ven, Jordan, and Pedro for years.
Right.
Before I came on.
That's awesome.
And my first episode as a full-time co-host was LWDW 111 on March 28th, 2018. and I haven't missed an episode ever.
Really?
And when I've been sick, I've had the flu, I've been there. And what's really cool is originally the show was hosted by Ven Stone, Pedro Mateus, and Matthew Commandan of Lutris, developer of Lutris. And after Matthew left, it took a year for them to find their replacement. And Matthew, who is one of my closest friends and one of the first people I met from Linux Gamecast, gave me lots of great insights and to being a co-host and being on the LGC network. And so one of the little notes I wrote down for myself is, Jill, so what is it like working with the bad boys of Linux? So, yeah, for me, I've always, all my hobbies and all my work has always been male dominant. So most of my friends have always been men. So it was no biggie to me. It was no biggie. I sought out the Linux chicks because I just didn't have a lot of female friends.
Right.
And so what was really cool is one of our ladies in our community said to me, "You got to be crazy, girl, to work with those guys." And yet the same gal who said that became a Patreon. And we even had other people who joined because they were so happy to support diversity in Linux podcasting. And all my Linux chicks of Los Angeles joined, a lot of people from the Scale community. So, and my family. So,
see, that's what's great about the Linux community.
Exactly. And that's been one of the most heartwarming aspects of joining the LGC family. So the LGC crew is actually amazing. Jordan is a quick wit with a great depth of knowledge about everything, not just Linux and computers. And despite all his dead baby jokes, he is one of the kindest and sweetest men I have ever met. And, one of my proud accomplishments as morale czar is I have been able to bring many of these people together in real life to meet for the first time after having been friends for so long doing the shows. And, we have our Linux Gamecast events at Scale, where we have our Linux Gamecast party house, and we broadcast live from there while we're at the convention. And then at Matthew's house for Linux Gamecast viewing parties. That was one of the first things I started. Let's do Linux Gamecast parties. And this is before I was working, with LGC. This was just me as a community member. And then, of course, at our Linux Chick-fil-A meetups or at the meetups at Community Hack Night at Riot Games.
Well, I think it's awesome, Jill, because you can see the passion in you for not just LWW, but all of the people in the community inside. And that's, like I said, that's what makes it great. Yeah.
It's just like, the community we have on Biddle, it's that same, sharing knowledge with everyone, but caring at the same time, caring about the person. And that's one of the wonderful things that Ven has brought to the table with Linux Gamecast. And in fact, Ven, this is the man who, through sheer force of will, hammered together the first all Linux powered video podcast, as well as the first Linux gaming podcast. And, and through it all, the interaction with the community, like we were talking about, whether it be of chat during live shows or in voice and video in the after shows and game streams. it was and still is unique among other Linux podcasts, especially when Ven started LGC when most didn't exist.
Right. That guy is amazing. The knowledge that he has is, I mean, I don't even think he realizes how much knowledge he has. Like, he'll make tutorial videos and he will try to make it simple for people. Yes. It's amazing.
He's done 3 in the last week of tutorial videos, along being full time with Linux Gamecast and doing his other job. He's amazing. And as you may be able to tell by his voice, you know, he is a professional talent.
Yep.
He's brought those standards to his audio quality and to those of us who host as well. And he can actually be a very hard taskmaster. But when it comes to audio,
sometimes that's needed.
Exactly. But he has made us all the better for it. And I really appreciate it because he's made it better for me. And even though I have a history in broadcasting, it was so many years ago, you know, in my 20s and early 30s that, you know, I had to relearn everything. And podcasting is a different world. We also have video as well. So I was used to being behind a mic, but having, you know, the video is something it took me a while to get used to.
Yep. Definitely something to get used to.
Yeah. And and you know, that was one of the reasons, besides getting into Linux Gamecast, besides having my favorite subjects, Linux and gaming. The other reason I was drawn to Ven's show was because no other Linux podcast sounded as good.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's an audio genius.
Yeah, he's amazing. I mean, we've done audio and video over Ethernet. You know, we're pulling in people on separate computers into OBS. You know, doing it. You know, capturing from separate computers, and he's got an incredible studio. And you know, in my college years, I actually had interned and worked at several radio stations in the LA area, and even had my own radio show that I produced and hosted for 16 years, which later was syndicated in Germany.
Really?
Yes.
16 years.
16 years I produced my own show and hosted it. And of course, that's another subject entirely. And oh my gosh, Rocco, how many rabbit holes are we allowed?
Too many rabbit holes to go down.
Too many rabbit holes. And I can't forget talking about Pedro Mateus.
Yep.
And, you know, he's our lovely Pedro has a degree in journalism, and his take on things is always so insightful, whether he's just talking off the cuff or after studying in depth. He's amazing to work with. And we've just got so much good camaraderie together because we become friends and we just work really well together because we have so many unique differences and areas of Linux that we know. So,
yep. Well, see, that's the key, because you can have all of the knowledge or you can have great personalities, but if you don't have that camaraderie and you don't have that gel that you guys work together with, you don't have it, and you guys have it, which makes the show twice as good as what it would normally be.
Oh, Thank you so much. A lot of that I know was because for so many years I was in chat interacting with them, and I would get on, you know, Ven years ago had me on in the after show and interviewed me, and then you know, I would literally stay up. Sometimes the shows we would be chatting about Linux and computers and hardware till literally 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning. So I already knew them very well and knew what I was getting into when I started full time with Linux Gamecast. And I just, you know, it's like I know them kind of like the back of my hand now and how they work. So
yep. Well, I suggest people go check that out if they haven't already, because it's a great show.
Yay. And I went on along about it. I have a couple little just a quick little points about it that's kind of special.
Do it.
Is one of the rewards of being on LWW is the response we get from small developers who are so excited that we cover their open source projects. a lot of the small time developers on GitLab and GitHub. They respond to us on Twitter and, very excited, and then, tell their friends. And
that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. And giving them exposure is a great way to give back to the community. So that's one of my rewards for doing LWDW. And so it's helping me learn as well as helping giving back to the community. And I just love that.
It's awesome. All right. Let's go back to Linux for a little bit, Jill. What is your daily workflow like as far as, do you have a hardware-based workflow where you're a keyboard-only user, or, you use window managers?
Yes.
So
yes, I use.
But do you have a set of software as well that you use?
Yes. So for my broadcasting rig, Pavu Control. I wouldn't be doing this without that. That is the Swiss Army knife of audio on Linux. Audacity, so I can check my levels, make sure I'm between -9 and -12 dB. GUVC View, and yes, that's one of those open source software names. That's hard to say. I'd have to have that for my camera.
Yep.
OBS, of course. FFmpeg for encoding and capturing. MPlayer, which I compile on every machine because I want that peak performance from my MPlayer on every machine. HexChat, Discord, Steam, Lutris, GIMP, Blender, Kdenlive, Shotcut, and the list goes on and on.
Oh my.
So that is my broadcasting rig. Now, my animation rendering workstations and render farm all have Blender, Modo, Maya, DaVinci Resolve, Kdenlive, RenderMan, Krita, Inkscape, GIMP. And I literally have over 100 animation and graphics apps on those machines because I have to. And that's one of the reasons why the main, the node for the main render farm is Debian, because of stability. Right. I need that stability because I can't constantly be upgrading those applications. They need to work when I need them to work.
Right. Well, you mentioned a couple video editors in there. Do you have a favorite maybe, or what is your take on the different ones like Kdenlive and Shotcut and DaVinci Resolve?
It's awesome because I actually use Kdenlive and Shotcut when I'm doing editing of videos for Linux Gamecast, for the scale videos I've done and whatnot. But for the industry, we need a GPU and CPU acceleration, and that's what's different about DaVinci Resolve. Plus, being a lot more complex and has more tools that I need. It's more like using Adobe Premiere or Final Cut. But Shotcut has just introduced GPU acceleration, and it's working pretty good, but it's still not quite there yet, but it's coming up in the world. And there's that new one, Olive, which has been really nice.
Yep.
But I still love Kdenlive. It's still one of my, first loves. It was, one of the highest end video editors that finally became stable on Linux.
Yep. It's still my go-to video editor, even though it does crash once in a while. It's still my go-to.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any software that's currently not available in Linux that you'd like to see come to Linux?
Not anymore. Not anymore. We have so many wonderful open source and proprietary software options now that meet my needs. I don't need to anymore.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So, with the advent of the Academy Software Foundation in Hollywood promoting open source, things are starting to really change dramatically. So we're getting a lot of that open source software as well as proprietary software that's working with each other, that we don't need Windows or Mac anymore. And that is just incredible.
I love it. So, a lot of people, including myself, sometimes think that, when we think of Linux, we only think of it on the desktop. We don't think of it as, like you said, in the film industry. But where does Linux stand at in your mind in the broad scheme of things?
Cool. So I was just thinking about this, kind of short and to the point. Linux is the most used operating system in the world. And now even Microsoft has to bow down to the Penguin. Our Penguin army is marching. Yay!
Well, Microsoft hearts Linux,
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay, so we talk about that and we make a joke out of that. But what is your take on that? Do you really think that they're serious about loving Linux?
I am, in so much as they see it as a way to stay current and profitable for the future. Windows subsystem for Linux. I see eventually Linux will be the Windows in the Windows. Well, it is in the Windows desktop, but it will be replacing the Windows desktop. I see that coming because to me, Microsoft is turning into a services company, and Office is and the Azure cloud are their two softwares and systems that they make money on. So, they're not really so much interested in the desktop anymore. So that's why I see eventually that's going to be, it's already starting with the services and the updates and whatnot. So,
yep.
Mm-hmm. The slow updates and services.
Yeah, that's a meme in itself.
Yeah.
So, Jill, some people think, again, my last guest, Michael Tennell, he thinks Linux is bad at marketing itself. And, I've asked everybody on the Linux Spotlight about this question.
Yeah.
And some people think that marketing's the wrong word to use. So some will say promoting, some will say evangelizing would be a better word. But should we be marketing Linux or promoting or evangelizing for Linux?
Promoting and evangelizing. Yeah, I mean, Linux is it's marketed on the server side, on the Internet of Things. That's why that area we're in everything. Linux is on everything. We dominates. Our penguins are marching forward. So companies like Canonical, they're not necessarily pushing the Ubuntu desktop. They've been starting to change, though. They're pushing that for AI because a lot of the developers are seeing that a lot of developers are starting to use it for their desktops as for AI and cloud computing. I think there's a lot more desktop usage than what the studies show, because there's no way to really quantify the Linux desktop because you have it a USB flash drive, you hand it to a friend, and yep. So yeah, you could have 10,000 downloads, but it could have spread to millions of people, that one download, so it's
yep.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Jill. Have you ever walked into your local computer store, whether that be Best Buy or some other store, and just wanted to install Linux on every computer?
Oh, yeah. Every time I go in there, of course, I'm always got one of my Linux shirts on, but I make sure that that's very apparent when I'm walking around. And, and I've actually, come to think of it, I've actually had people ask me, because I have a Linux shirt on, about Linux questions. And that's one of the cool things about living here in LA is even though they might not have heard the term Linux, they know there's this other operating system that controls the Internet of Things and servers. People are smart, and they know that Windows and Mac is just desktop. And that's what I've been noticing, especially in the last few years in the LA greater community. but they know there is something else out there. They
Yep.
just don't know yet that it's better. So-
Yet. They don't know yet. All right. So I will usually say that the community is the best reason to run Linux. There's many other reasons to run Linux: open source software, flexibility, customization. You can see the passion that you have for Linux. So what drives that passion?
Oh boy, all of the above. I think all equally, really. But, when I started, it was a different world. We didn't have that community. So the ability to tinker with it and to build it the way you want, all the tools are there so that you can create what you need, whether it was scripting, creating software, or just modifying the user interface and creating themes. And I just love having an OS that teaches me new things each day, constantly learning.
Never stop.
Never stop learning.
Yep. So you've been in Linux for a really long time.
Yeah.
So you have to have had a ton of experience in the community as far as how people have been treated, including yourself. So on a whole, has this been like a good experience, a bad experience?
Oh, it's been wonderful, especially within, like, say, the last, well, since I've been with Linux Gamecast, and to take it back a little bit, it was the Scale community, that friendship, that camaraderie, that enthusiasm, that excitement that we have at Scale, my Scale family, really is what launched me into the community and working with the Linux Chicks of Los Angeles. They were the start of that community, and because of them and because of the other Linux conventions, that has spread and people are sharing their knowledge, and the communities have gotten better and are being nice to the new people and experienced users alike. And
Yep.
I just love that.
I'm telling you, it's infectious when you get around people that not only think like you do or talk about things that you're interested in, but that are so welcoming.
Yeah.
And friendly. And, now, granted, I'm sure that you have seen it in the past, but I've seen it where we didn't always have the greatest reputation as far as being friendly.
Yeah.
There have been many times where people have not acted the right way, but we're improving that all the time.
Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely.
So, Jill, what can we do to make it better as a community?
I think, having all these YouTube Linux podcasters, has really helped, because YouTube is the major place that people consume video. And so many new users are coming to our shows because of it. YouTube is really, really important. And wikis, and, having good documentation, of course, the strive of every distro and project out there.
Well, you touched on the podcast and the YouTube community, and I think that's okay. So I've noticed that between the communities, there are a lot of the same members.
Yeah.
That frequent the same podcasts. And I think that's important because there was a time, and maybe still is, that there was some line between some of the podcasts and some of the YouTube channels and whatnot. And I think I've seen today, in today's time, more and more collaboration.
Yes.
More and more friendliness between networks and stuff like that, that it's making it so much better.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The internet has just been, wonderful for that. Another resource that are meetups, tech meetups. Find your local tech meetups and lugs and become a part of those meetups, those communities. It's just amazing. That's really helped me learn about other open source projects that are out there, other communities. Like I was talking about, we do our own meetups with Linux Chicks of Los Angeles, But going to community hack night at Riot Games, that community has been incredible because they're they use Linux on the back end there. So most of the people there are Linux users, although they'll be using Windows and Mac as well. But just being involved in those communities that you can learn from, I think is a really good step for new users to Linux and intermediate and advanced alike. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about living here in Los Angeles, because we have become kind of that melting pot, not just for diversity and people, but for communities.
Yep. Yep. And I think that, like, even if you don't have a local Linux user group,
yes,
you can always join Biddle.
Yes, exactly. You have online ones like Biddle, Linux Unplugged, Chris Fisher, Jupiter Broadcasting.
Yep. Absolutely.
He's why I'm in podcasting in the first place, actually.
Well, see, that's why I said about going back to there used to be like that silent wall between networks. And I think that that's going away. And I think it's awesome. Yeah. I think we can all agree on one thing, that we love Linux. And that's all that really matters.
Exactly.
So, Jill, you've been, I don't know, coding since you were in diapers. Yeah, pretty much. So do you have like a favorite project that you worked on?
Okay, so one of them, and in fact, I have it here. I have one of them on my EPC. This is the original 700 series of EPC. And I compiled my own distro for it based on Debian that I call Jillix.
I love it. I love that you can pronounce it too. Great job, Jill.
That was my name before Jill_Linux girl. And so this is the desktop. Of course, Window Maker is there.
Of course.
And I made my own custom theme for it. And I remember being so excited at the Southern California Linux Expo because the developers of Window Maker were there and they were so impressed.
Really?
With my theming I did and the fact that, I compiled Debian on my EPC, even though there were other already Debian images made for the EPC, I wanted to learn how to do it myself. And it wasn't the first time that I had compiled something. I compiled on hardware on a computer. But this was one of my most rewarding because I got to show it to the community. So
when are you releasing this? Are we able to download it?
No. In fact, I'm looking at it. It is so, this is like from 2007. and I never got around to doing many updates on it. But I can still use new version of Firefox and browse the internet and,
Love it.
And, gosh, so that's one. I have so many. It's hard.
What's the next one? What's the next favorite one that you have?
Okay. My next one is my Zip-It wireless messenger. This was a little computer for doing text messaging. Back in the day, in the mid 2000s, and mostly aimed at kids. And I actually got Debian working on it. There were other Debian mods for it, but I wanted to make my own. And actually, this Zip-It died, so I can't show you. But I had Window Maker on the desktop. And I installed it over lots of SSH to do the updates because I only really see out of one eye and the screen is really tiny.
Yep.
And it's one of the reasons I use Window Maker because the dock apps, you can make them nice and big in the icons. So, but at scale one year, I had it playing, some of my animations and Big Buck Bunny. And I worked really hard and getting everything to work and the keyboard. I did a lot of configuration on the keyboard to get it working. And fortunately, I have, I turned this on today and just remembered, this one doesn't work. And I do have another backup, but I have to flash the BIOS and, so I can put my Debian distro on there. yeah, it was compiled. It was for ARM, and that was another challenge because
Yeah.
ARM was still fairly, new at that time for devices for, Debian.
Now, do you have a GitHub page, Jill?
It's funny because I've been transferring over to GitLab, so I don't have everything up yet. But yes, I used to. I transferred when Microsoft took over. So,
Got you.
So that's where I've been putting all my tutorials and whatnot of the devices that I've modded. And
Well, we will have to put a link in the show notes for that.
okay. And yeah, so that's another one is I've written many tutorials, including editing configurations for Unity, Unreal Engine, and Valve Source Engine games to play spanning on 3 monitors for our 3-monitor gaming rigs I built and raffled off at the Linux Chick-fil-A booth at scale that I was talking about earlier. Because that is a trick. Most games still don't work spanning 3 monitors.
You're talking about having the screen span all 3 so that you can see from side to side.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And it's a trick.
I need one of those, Jill.
Okay. I'll give you a copy of my tutorials. It was written a couple years ago, but it's still relevant today. And now that just over a year, just under a year ago, I was running 3 30-inch monitors. And now I have a 43-inch Ultra HD monitor, and I'm in the process of putting the 2 other 30-inch monitors portrait on the side of my big monitors.
Yeah.
Wall, and I'm thinking of putting the other 30-inch above my 43-inch. So just a wall. It's my dream to be like the Matrix, have my wall computer screen.
Oh, I love it. Better have a strong desk for that. Unless they're wall mounted.
Yeah, I've already got probably over 500 pounds on this desk. So.
Yep. So you've done many projects. You've done a lot of coding. You've obviously run into issues along the way.
Yeah.
So do you have like a story about a big issue you had and solved it?
Yeah. Well, for personal, of course, getting all these distros to run on my little device.
On your 102 computers that you have.
Yeah. And that is that is a challenge. I mean, I got Linux running on my Mac Classic back there. That was a feat.
Nice.
So, but for my work, like getting my Real Magic Hollywood Plus MPEG decoder cards to work on Linux, getting video capture cards and sound cards, and this is in the 90s, getting this stuff to work. It was a trick. And for me, that's what really changed is when Linux had full, sound card support and multimedia support. Then the Hollywood industry, was moving over from Unix to Linux. So that's when that started. But in those early days, I had to learn how to do it. Lots of PKG compiling and insmods and.
Well, we have it so good today in Linux that this stuff just works.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that way years ago. There was a lot of pain and effort put into it.
Yeah.
All right. Jill, you've been excited to be in the development coding since you were little.
Yeah.
How did you learn the best? Was it reading documentation? Was it watching somebody do it? Was it somebody explaining it to you? Which way did you learn the best?
In the early years, we only had one way: books. The software would come with the manuals you'd get at Best Buy and Borders. I love Borders.
Yep.
They were the best source of Linux box distros and books later on. But in those early years, you had to buy the distro with the books, at the stores to get the documentation. And I'm talking about like the BBS years. But for me, because I had access to the BBS, that really helped. And there was a lot of advanced Unix and people moving over to Linux on there. See, we don't have any more here in Los Angeles. They went under here. So I was really sad about that because I had one within walking distance. We have Barnes and Noble, and they're actually really because Borders went under, Barnes and Noble has done a good job at kind of filling in that space. And so they do have a really good Linux section.
Gonna have to check it out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Jill, what do you think of when I say the year of the Linux desktop?
Oh boy. So I honestly feel that we are actually already there. Yeah. Android and Chrome OS desktops are not pure Linux, but the Linux kernel is what they run on top of. And the Internet of Things interfaces. Some of those desktops are based on our favorite desktop environment. So it is there. Yes, we don't have Ubuntu and all the things, but I'm starting to see Ubuntu more at the cashiers checkouts at our local stores. So that's been really amazing.
Yep. Well, I would love to see stores like Best Buy or something like those types of stores sell Linux computers.
Yeah. And I honestly think that's going to happen soon because Dell's already doing that with Project Sputnik. They've already got pages now on their website that you can go to and configure a Linux workstation and server. And, that's what we needed. Once they got that on there, to me, that was the turning point. Now we'll start seeing the XPS 13 in the stores with Ubuntu. So that's just...
Well, System 76 does an awesome job.
Yes.
For the space that they're in.
Yes.
Online, if you want a computer, I'm telling you, I've bought computers at other places. Don't do it. Just go to System 76 and buy a computer.
Yeah. And so exactly on the internet, to me, System 76 is king. So their customer service, their involvement in the community. One of my favorite people in the world I look up to is Emma, the happiness manager of System 76. I love her. She is one of my favorite people, and I'd love to see her here on Linux Spotlight.
She is pretty awesome. So, Jill, if you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
Well, after just listening to Popey talk about tribalism, and is it okay, Popey? I'm going to use you.
I'm sure he won't mind.
Yeah, we love our Alan Pope. So, Popey nailed it on the head with tribalism. To me, it's all Linux. We're all using the same thing. Just use what distro and desktop manager you like and don't complain about other people's choices. We all have different needs and things we like about certain distros and desktop environments. And the beauty of Linux is that of diversity, and we have freedom of choice. And to me, that is what open source software is all about.
Yep. It's well said. Well said. It is absolutely awesome that we live in a time where, Linux has gained leaps and bounds in the ease of use and the way the desktop actually operates. And there is still so much choice that there isn't anybody out there that couldn't have it the way they wanted it.
Yeah, exactly. Everything. There's every distro in the world. If you like Arch, you can do Endeavor OS, Ubuntu. Look at all the derivatives. It's just, it's insane. It's insane. Yep. Or you can use Slackware. I still run a modern version of Slackware. I still love Slackware.
Well, going back to the tribalism for a minute, there's, you always have these arguments where, KDE is better than GNOME or GNOME is better than KDE, or I like this because of, I like KDE because GNOME is trash, or I like GNOME because KDE is terrible in this. And it's like, all you really have to say is I like KDE. Yeah, it works.
If it works for you, use what works for you and what you like. A lot of people like KDE because it has that when they came from the Windows world and it has that Windows-like interface. And other people like using GNOME. I've been really impressed with GNOME, what they've done with performance and improving the desktop and the Snap integration. It's really incredible.
Well, the new version of GNOME promises to be even better.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. 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 I can't wait to play around with that.
All right. Thinking back, Jill, to the reasons that you chose to run Linux, do those reasons still apply today?
Yes, because I love the tinker. I love I love getting distros to work on computers that it wasn't intended for.
Right.
So it's so much fun. And I've got some older computers, like, oh gosh, I was just thinking about my Compact Concerto. It was the first tablet computer that ran Windows CE or Windows 3.1.
Wow.
And getting Linux on that thing. Oh my gosh. You got
Linux on that?
I got Linux running at it. And I found, fortunately, a developer that had support for the touch screen. So I remember going back and forth with him saying, but it's not working, with Debian right now. And he's like, well, I'll work on that for you. And he did. So that was,
it's amazing.
Just amazing. And now community is a huge part because it's so inviting, because we have progressed. And, we have these wonderful communities that are inviting to new users. It's no longer, you're a new user, don't even come our way, or we don't even want to think about you anymore. It's definitely changed. And I think Linux podcasting and video casting has so much to do with that, really.
Yep. And I think the communities that go to each individual podcasting group, like I said, they're interchangeable. Like you can go to this group and you'll find half the people that are in that group in this group. And that's awesome.
Yeah. Like I love hanging out with Fiddle and with Jupiter Broadcasting and all the things, and Destination Linux.
Yep. So is there anything else you want to share with people, Jill?
Oh boy, we covered a lot. The only thing I can think of is I have my own personal YouTube account, which has some videos I made of, for instance, of a computer room tour of my room. In fact, it was the video that was ran the very first time I was on LWW, and a lot of people really liked it. And I've done scale videos that are on there, as well as Linux Chicks LA videos. So I will give you that link.
We will have it in the show notes and people can check it out. Mm-hmm. All right. How can people get in touch with you, Jill? What's the best way?
Twitter. at Jill_Linux Girl. Also on Mastodon at Jill_Linux Girl at mast.linuxgamecast.com. And my email at Linux Gamecast, which is jill@linuxgamecast.com.
Awesome. Jill, thank you so much for this discussion. It was absolutely awesome. I loved it.
Oh, thank you, Rocco. You're so friendly and warm and inviting. And that's one of the things I love about the Biddle community. You just spread that to the community. And it's just been so nice talking to you. And what an honor. Thank you for asking me.
Well, I'm guarantee you this episode is going to be a huge episode because, like I said, people really wanted to know your background, your history, and you didn't disappoint.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope I didn't say too much. It was too long, but
no. All right, that's going to wrap up our discussion. Thank you all for joining us this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux.
Mm-hmm.